Good morning, everyone. You are now here in What If It Happens? And this is the second session. Today, we are going to be doing unconscious bias. As I mentioned yesterday, I do not start with unconscious bias, though everybody really would like for me to, because I think we have to kind of start at a starting place, like a null set place. So hopefully yesterday you were able to kind of do some reflection on your own definitions of what responsibility is and your own sense of agency and who and how you are, maybe even bonus round how you got to be who and how you are. Today, we're going to do unconscious bias. I appreciate everyone being here, and hopefully you got the emails. Please share out to as many people as possible. People can still register even though the series already started because I'm recording all the sessions. Today, unconscious bias. We're focusing on our perception of self and others. So we're not going to talk about their unconscious bias. We're talking about our unconscious bias. Again, the texting number applies 202-670-4262. Text message anytime, anything you want. Last night, I had a very good conversation with an attendee from yesterday. So my job is to be thought-provoking. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the next 59 minutes. So whenever you want to, feel free to text. And to keep up with the children from 10 years ago, feel free to use the QR code to follow me on Instagram, because evidently that's something I need to be doing, is having people follow me in a way that's not creepy. I'm working on it. Okay, fantastic. I know Emily is all over it. When she said she was going to be here, I'm like, great. But I didn't get to deputize her because Pat came first. So Emily, race Pat, and you'll get deputized tomorrow. All right. For this particular session, I do find that in an Alanis Morissette irony kind of way, there is an expectation of what we are going to talk about with unconscious bias, which I find hysterical. So I'm going to ask you to kind of check that, because that bias that you have about unconscious bias, that I have about unconscious bias, is actually causing us an inability to notice where our positive or negative bias exists. Unconscious bias is not always negative. We have positive bias, we have negative bias. Some of it we're conscious of, most of it we're unconscious of. And I want you to be able to get to a space where you can kind of understand where you're coming from, when you're coming from it, so you can flex that muscle in the given moment. That's what we're shooting for. So I'm going to start off, as per usual, with something controversial. So some of you may not have been on social media when this happened, others were. But when you see these two dresses, please put in the chat what color you saw when it showed up in your social media universe. This was a thing where somehow or another we got different images of something, and then we were team yellow or gold and team blue and black. So please notice in the chat, it's all over the place. So, and of course, there's always an overachiever who sees both. So what is fascinating is, and Emily, you said you didn't see this before. Great. So this was an early social media experiment, basically to see how quickly our bias builds up a sense of loyalty. I would assume there's got to be some marketing juice behind this experiment. So these images, one image, you didn't get both of them next to each other, but these images showed up on social media and asked, what color is this dress? And if you can imagine what Facebook comments are like now, this was the beginning of it. There were ruthless comments about how could you possibly misunderstand what color this dress is. I mean, if you're colorblind or something, okay. But if you can see colors, there is no way you would confuse these two colors because they don't look the same. And the secret is that people got different pictures. The lighting of the same picture, a tint or Photoshop of the same picture, produced what looks like a same dress in two different colors. Intellectually, we could understand that. But initially on the Facebook comments, people did not go there. They went, you're nuts because gold and white does not look like blue and black. How are you wrong? That piece, I think, was the start of permission granting for Facebook comments to go completely AWOL. That's my opinion. That is not scientific. Okay, so if you understand kind of what it is that you see, then you're able to understand that it is possible other people might see something else. That's kind of a callback from yesterday. So as we are talking about this, I want you to put in the chat, what do you see in this picture? Just tell me what this picture, the story of this picture, what's happening, and put it in the chat. This is not a Facebook trick. I actually took this picture, waiting for the chat to come. Someone sitting overlooking the ocean, person's enjoying a view over the water, a runner with a prosthetic leg sitting near the ocean, full-bodied man brought his leg on a hike. Great. Anyone else? Guy taking a break, sitting by the ocean. Okay, fantastic. Okay. Here's what's fascinating about this particular picture. And this is a little bit of me using myself as a tool because I mess this up all the time. So this is my brother-in-law, Steve. These are his legs. Just in case you made any assumption that this was a man to begin with, for the record, I haven't shaved my legs since the 1900s. So these could be my legs, but they are not my legs. So this is my brother-in-law, Steve. He's wonderful and luckily has a very strong sense of humor. So he does have a prosthetic leg. It was a shipyard accident, if any of you are interested. What is interesting to me is that when I started using this picture in this webinar, the amount of gymnastics that people will do so that they don't have to say that this person has a prosthetic leg is just as impressive as the people who are like, this person has a prosthetic leg. Excuse me. Why I think this is interesting is that when I visit Steve, so Steve lives on the west coast of Ireland, that is where this water and this wall exist. When I go and visit Steve, he's by far my favorite family member I inherited through marriage. Don't tell anybody else that. And he could pick us up from the train station. We get to his house, whatever. They're having Guinness. I'm sitting there probably eating chocolate. And somehow the drape of his pants will catch my attention. And there is a moment, I'm being dead honest, there is a moment where I panic because it seems as though Steve has lost a leg. Like he seems to be missing an ankle. The urgency that wells up in me to find Steve's ankle, it is not lost on me. We have been married for almost 20 years, and this happens every single time. And I think it happens likely because I don't see that many people who are missing a leg. I don't have that many amputees in my life. And when I am with Steve, my brain notices something different and then feels a degree of responsibility to fix the thing that's different, ideally before he knows that it's different. I do not understand this motivation. And Steve is pretty clear that he's missing a leg. He was really, there when it happened. I find this interesting because what is it about unconscious bias that is connected to my need to fix it before the other person knows about it? And why does it need to be fixed? What is it in me that's like, oh, I have noticed something irregular. I must make it more regular. And I think there's a connection between how we hold our conscious bias and our unconscious bias. Notice I didn't say negative or positive. Maybe I somewhere in my brain think it's negative to be missing an ankle. I don't know. Maybe that's what's fueling the fix. But the last time or 2 times ago now that I visited him, I decided that I needed to really look into why is this always my reaction? So I put this in the webinar, and then now I have noticed this pattern of this lovely person taking a break, looking at the ocean. Sometimes the word veteran will get used, which is as close to naming that this person may be an amputee, but there are people who are amputees who are not even in the military, right? So just notice what you needed to say, and if it was different than what you typed about what you said. No judgment value, just notice it. If we can do that, I think we can at least become more conscious of where this came from. Now, jumping from Steve's leg to Jessica Simpson probably was not something you were expecting, but I was able to kind of track down when I was doing my own work on like, where is this need to like be fixed or fix came from? And I think I traced it back to Jessica Simpson. Now, I haven't looked at the participant list in full. I don't know if anyone else named Jessica is on this call. So if so, this could be triggering. I grew up in Texas. My name is Jessica. And Jessica McClure was a baby who fell in a well. Some of you may know about this or not. But I would go to school and my teachers would say, teachers, like educated people would say, have you heard anything about the baby in the well? Like there is a Jessica hotline that would give me an update about what is going on. This is pre-internet. This is 1800s, 1900s. I'm not that old. No, I didn't know. I didn't have any kind of connection just because we had a similar name, but there was an expectation that I would somehow know or have more interest, which I think is connected to this kind of bias wiring. So I'm showing you these pictures of Jessica Simpson because if you are not aware, I am not, well, you should first be aware that I'm not into pop culture like at all. And some people don't know who Jessica Simpson is, but evidently she is a singer. So at some point in time, someone, probably Pat, is going to put the date in there, but there was a movie about Dukes of Hazzard, and she was cast as Daisy Duke. I did grow up with Dukes of Hazzard, and the picture on the left is her kind of in costume, if you can call that, as Daisy Duke, who was supposed to be this very attractive woman. She disclosed later in interviews that she worked out like 8 hours a day, was on very limited calorie intake, etc., in order to take this movie. I don't think that's very healthy. Her normal state of being is generally like a size 1 or 2. And to be Daisy Duke, she was actually a size 0. Very different workshop. But why are we shooting to like not exist? I think there's some sexism in there. I digress. I'm bringing this up because People magazine, which growing up was biblical in my family, People magazine posted an article that Jessica had completely lost it. People started forwarding me this article because they thought that I would know what was going on with Jessica Simpson. Again, back to Jessica McClure. Now, the reason why was that the picture on the right was her recently at a concert. Now, please withhold time. You have to make a movie in advance of it being released. We forgot that. So real time, people are seeing her on the left in a movie, and the same day appeared at a concert. Except the image of her at the concert that is accurate is actually the one that's in the middle. The one that was actually being posted is the one on the right, which I think is still a quite small, petite person, and maybe not on a 500 calorie restricted diet. But the weight gain of Jessica McClure caused, Jessica McClure is the baby. This is Jessica Simpson. Focus, Jess. The weight gain was such a thing that it became a mass article, not just in People magazine, but in like actual, legit magazines. This cartoon came out because at the time she was dating some sports ball player. And the idea that she had become this obese person while the movie was in theaters was top news. Now, sexism, sizeism, things like this is not new. And you are obviously here for a diversity webinar series. Why I want to mention this is that when I talk about my worldview, my body image, my ability to feel positive or negative about my body, my shape, my size, is something that has been creating a bias in me for a very long time. This is not a new thing. It's not a fad that I'm now paying attention to this, but it is something that I've paid attention to my whole life. And so when you are tracing back what are the roots of your bias, I want to give you the opportunity that they don't even necessarily have to be connected, but when you can discover when a root occurred, it is a thread that will pull through to right now. And that's what informs any positive or negative bias that you're conscious or unconscious of. To me, being able to kind of showcase how my worldview about what our bodies are supposed to look like, there are thousands of examples. I was raised by professional athletes. In order to spend time with my dad, I was often working weigh-in, which is a very vulnerable time in an athlete's life. So my relationship with what a body is supposed to look like impacts how I interact with all living human beings. I'm not fixing it. I'm trying to note the root so that I can be responsible for it and determine if I want to keep it up or I don't. That's the skill here. Some people do unconscious bias trainings and it's like, how to not be a jerk. You are welcome to go to those trainings. I'm still a jerk, but I now know at least some of the roots of where those behaviors or those assumptions, those biases are coming from. Now, this invisible framework that I'm talking about is often referred to, at least in an organization, as a culture. It's this kind of intangible, ever moving, ever changing, yet somehow very consistent thing that an organization has. And sometimes it's a lot easier, ironically, for us to look at an organization and see what the workplace culture is like. But I'm going to ask you, when we're talking about conscious and unconscious bias, is what is your culture like? What is in here that you like? What is in here that you don't like? What's congruent or incongruent with your beliefs and values? Again, no judgment. I mean, that's a lie. Obviously, I'm judging you unless you're exactly the way I am, but no judgment, at least in this webinar. What I want you to do is to try to identify, what do you want to keep? What do you want to work on? And what is just oddly incongruent, but is a significant part of you? When we can understand our own invisible framework, we can take yesterday's responsibility and agency and do something with it, right? Like, I identify as a pacifist, and yet cussing is like a regular thing in my life. Every day that I do any kind of presentation, I have to put some kind of cussing filter in. Sometimes it slips, but please know there is still a filter in. But cuss words are rooted mostly in violence and mostly in sexualized violence. That does not seem congruent with someone who also identifies as a pacifist. Yep, it's an incongruency. I'm going to keep it. I did try to edit it. That was like a goal one year, was to not cuss. I didn't make it to January, but I did like consciously try. So again, you're flexing. What are you conscious of? What are you unconscious of? And can you become more conscious of what you were unconscious of? This is our own individual work. Joe Gerstan is a great friend of mine. And this is one of my favorite lines that he often says. And I actually talk about this in my new book as well. But you're not responsible for your first thought. Like, that's kind of just innate in us. But you are responsible for your second thought. And ideally, your second thought is what motivates your first action. But the gap between the two, that's where your own individual power is. That's the source of that power. So I'm going to encourage you to kind of notice the reaction and the response and the gap in between. So back to things you're probably used to seeing. Emily, even you in Canada, I'm assuming, has seen this. So when you see this optical illusion, what's the first thing you see? Please put it in the chat. See team duck, team bunny, team rabbit. Billy's got extra skills. She can flip back and forth. Great. Usually there's someone who's very specific that says a seagull or some very specific kind of rabbit. Okay, this is a pretty common optical illusion. So what I want to invite you to think of is this third element, right? Is it a duck or is it a bunny? Do we have to get like cutthroat loyal to team bunny or team duck? Are you superior if you can flip back and forth between bunny and duck? Or can you just realize that someone drew an image that looks enough like a duck to look like a duck and enough like a bunny to look like a bunny, so that one image is kind of both? If you can practice that space, that skill, it's going to come in handy in other contexts. Sometimes you can't do it. Sometimes it's a lot easier. You're in charge of noticing that. That's where you can become conscious of your biased behaviors or biased reactions. So Kathleen says, couldn't make it out until I said duck and bunny. Then it was kind of easier. Okay, great. So let's pretend that we could just clean this all out. Any negative bias that we don't want, all the things we want to get rid of, they're just gone. Like poof, format, hard drive, whatever you need to do. Spoiler alert, I don't think that's possible. I think you just kind of have to work with what you got. But what if you could? The idea that duck bunny can happen at the same time is often very uncomfortable for people. And it's because we're really comfortable with what I would refer to as a binary. It is this, which means it is not this. Comfort. There's two options, the wrong one, and of course the right one. But I'm using examples for you where that's the trick. There isn't a right one and there isn't a wrong one, but we are applying our bias to it, right? The dress at the beginning, or in the description, I talk about the other thing that was on social media. There was another loyalty test, was the Laurel and Yanny. Do y'all remember that? It was a sound you listened to. And then we were all Team Yanny because the Laurels were all wrong. I just upset everyone who heard Laurel. Instead of looking for what is correct and what is wrong, I'm going to ask you to flex the muscle to be able to see both, even if it's just for a moment. And then you can pick and choose which one you want to be on. But the ability to see that middle space, that's the muscle that you have to flex in order to begin to notice your unconscious bias, because then you're going to become conscious of it and choose to keep it or not keep it. So let's go to the media. What a great source. So some of you were around or very much involved in Katrina. And so these two articles came at the same time after the Hurricane Katrina. The top one, I'm going to use my bias of how I interpret these two pictures. If you're multitasking, you might want to look at the pictures. So the top picture, I see a young Black boy wading in water, holding stuff. When I read the description, it says a young man walks through chest-deep floodwaters after looting a grocery store. Okay, well, racism is real, so of course we're going to say that they were stealing stuff from a grocery store. Bottom picture, I interpret this as two white adults. I don't know why the top one looks like a kid and the bottom one looks like adults to me, but isn't that fascinating? But these two residents, so it doesn't give me a clue, these two residents wade through chest-deep waters after finding bread and soda at a local grocery. Imagine how like clouds parted and little birds came and music played, and just floating by them was perfectly decent food and beverages to drink in the middle of an emergency. We're not unfamiliar with racial bias in news reporting. And when I was doing these every single day during COVID, eventually somebody would tell me like, well, this is old. This isn't the way it is anymore. I disagree. So that day, because I'm a jerk, I found these two posts on Twitter. So two people, I'm not even reading the words, right? Just looking at the pictures. The top one is a guy with a beard and a plaid shirt and like a cream couch. I have a very strong bias between a cream couch, about a cream couch. Number one, for some reason, I automatically assume this is a dentist, and clearly they do not have children. What are they doing? Who is brave enough to have a light colored couch? That's all I'm saying. The bottom picture is a young man, maybe a boy, a Black man, maybe a Black boy, wearing a hoodie. Because of the color of the hoodie, I kind of instantly go to like one of those orange jumpsuits, so they're probably in jail. Okay, that's what I see in the pictures. Great. So this is a victim who was murdered. That is the picture that was used after he was found dead. And this is a murderer. There's a bad guy, not a dentist. Although some dentists are also bad guys. That's a different Venn diagram. That happened the day that the person told me that this was racial bias didn't exist anymore. So this is in 2020, 2021. Yes, it does. When we then want to do good about how our bias is, this is one of my favorite things ever about Sam Smith. Sam Smith is a musician who came out using gender neutral pronouns. A lot of us very much struggle with using gender neutral pronouns because we like to think that we know all the answers, and we make a lot of assumptions about somebody's gender expression or gender performance. So we assume that we automatically know a binary, that this is a masculine person, this is a feminine person, therefore masculine pronouns are feminine pronouns. And occasionally we are told that the person uses gender neutral pronouns. And what gets tripped in us is you thought you knew the answer. How could you possibly know somebody else's answer? But I digress. You think you know the answer, so then you get really defensive. Or we get what I would guess is called grammarist, and that we're like, no, you can't use they, them in a singular way. Have you heard of William Shakespeare? He did. Worked okay with his writing career. And let's say you ordered a whisk from Amazon. When your phone says the whisk has been delivered and you're like, where the F is my whisk? You're walking around saying, where did they put it? You do not mean the 10 million employees of Amazon. You mean whichever doodle was driving the truck. Where did they put your box? You can use it singularly, just not when you're called out and supposed to. So in this particular article, the article about Sam Smith using gender neutral pronouns, they gender the artist in the article trying to do good. This is what we mean by bias and why you have to flex this muscle to notice when you're doing it and when you're not doing it, mostly because it's unconscious. You can get to positive and negative later, but you need to at first notice what it is you're not even noticing. Now, when we start talking about responsibility, it is usually somebody else's fault. And that is also a displacement of responsibility. So I like to kind of include this little poem. Some people like to take a screenshot of it because it's like good poetry. But I'm going to encourage you, instead of waiting for someone else to fix your own awareness of your own bias, you could just head and start. You'll forget, and it's hard work, so then you'll stop doing it, and then maybe you'll come back to it. Okay, great. But this is your work. This is my work to be doing. What does Jessica Simpson have to do with my reaction to my brother-in-law's amputation? Nothing on paper, and everything when I think about how my worldview was built up. So that's your homework to do. I'm disclosing my wackadoodleness to give you permission to use your own as a tool. Now, I did mention yesterday, and I'll mention again, I am working on a new book. And I want to introduce kind of what these variables are, at least on an organizational level, because we're going to spend this webinar primarily looking on an individual level. So I'm going to talk about what I call head, heart, and action. And that is what I talk about in Good Enough Now, which is placed gently above my hand because I do this all the time. And the book club that I'll mention at the end is about Good Enough Now. When we talk on an organizational level, perhaps in this context, you're more comfortable thinking about when you're prepared, or when you're able to recognize something, or when you're able to actually respond in a conscious way. That's kind of really where we're going with the new book. But for this conversation and for your individual work that's in Good Enough Now, we're going to talk about head, heart, and action. So these are the three variables I think that show up the most when we're really focusing on our bias. Now I'm going to use public art. Some people call it graffiti, but public art in a way of kind of showing this. So Lauren and I were walking around San Francisco. This is really close to Dolores Park, 400 years ago now, so I have no idea if this is still up. And this lovely piece of work was being actively painted. So if your response to public art, my first thing I do typically is spell check it. I really don't like the fonts that are hard to read, but it's only because I'm trying to spell check it. Perhaps you see a big mural and you immediately think like, was that permitted? Right? Does that increase or decrease the property values? These are very kind of detail-oriented ways of thinking about something. And it's the rationalization of being able to understand a thing. Some of us are like go-to move is to understand the details about it first. Some people, that is absolutely not what's happening up here when they see something. Some people want to know who the artist is, or tell me all your story, or when they see it, they're instantly thinking about doing outdoor community events. So you have one person who's talking about building permits, and you have another person who's suddenly Googling like outdoor inflatable movie theaters, right? It looks like they are miscommunicating. And don't get me wrong, as a consultant, this is how I make most of my money. But they're not miscommunicating. They're just like gut reaction is coming from a very different place. When you start looking at murals and you first go to these kind of like big idea experiences that could happen instead of spell checking it, that might be more hearty. It's a more hearty idea-based response. Great, good to know. Now, this is really where I show up. If you see artwork and you want to know, did they get up there? Right? Was it a helicopter? Was it ladders? Are they dangling backwards? There was a story in the news the other day about big skyscrapers in LA that talk about some bias. It's being reported that the skyscrapers that are empty, it's empty real estate, are being attacked. That was the word used in the news, because the balconies are being covered in graffiti. They're all being tagged. Now the newscasters feel very hip using the word tagged, but they see this as like a criminal attack because it's impacting property values, etc. I don't know why. I think it looks hella cool because these giant skyscrapers have all these cool colors all the way down the corners on the balconies. My first thought, I'm getting into an empty building. I'm on like the 70th floor. Could they possibly have just broken into the building? No, it's more fun to think of them like a squad of Spider-Mans, like somehow being dropped on the roof and like scaling the building quietly at night and painting their pretty pictures. If you're having that kind of response, likely it is an action-oriented response. Action can also be inaction. If you've ever been in a scenario where your bias is about to be tripped and you're like, I am a spinning rainbow ball of death, to be inclusive, a blue screen happens. Inaction is also potentially a response when you're just kind of frozen and you don't know what to do. So that's head, heart, and action. These three variables are in all of us. And spoiler alert, when you use all three of them, you're actually able to be far more effective. But when it's our gut reaction, that first space that Joe talked about, usually it is from one of these kind of places because it's our habit. It makes us feel safe and prepared. And that tends to be what we do first. Head, heart, and action. Now, some people, usually heady people, are like, may I see the entire piece of artwork, please? This is the side of the building that day. I don't know if it still exists. Google it. Okay, so when you are coming up heady, when you are showing up hearty, when you are showing up in an action-oriented way, the idea that I talk about in my book is the gas pedal. And that is you're able to slow down or accelerate because you are now conscious of what you are doing. So I'm going to encourage you, and we'll talk about this in the book club, I'm going to encourage you to find your own gas pedal and become conscious of it. When do you need to slow your roll a little bit and kind of ask more questions? And when can you accelerate forward because you actually are conscious and able to be 100% responsible for whatever it is you're about to do? That's the gas pedal. So as I often talk about, my favorite social justice heroes, we're going to start with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King typically showed up in a very heart action-oriented way. My Martin Luther King joke, of course, is that he had a dream, not a plan. Right? There are people behind Martin Luther King that did all the work. And the part of the speech that we all remember that is the I Have a Dream speech was like a 45-minute riff over schedule. I imagine the meeting planner like chain smoking under the bleachers, panicking. How do you get Martin Luther King to shut up? And then, of course, that's the only part we remember, right? That's justice. He was eventually able to tap into a system, right? So his heady part was able to show up. And that is actually when he predicted his own assassination. His system wasn't having a PhD before he turned 40 or even being an ordained minister, but it was when his work went from his kind of own work to actually tapping into an economic system and working for a wage for everyone, a living wage for everyone. When he tapped into an economic system around labor, all three of his variables were able to show up and his work became unstoppable. Now, similarly, Mother Teresa, also a very difficult person to work with, but not assassinated. So, I mean, bonus. Mother Teresa would always show up with her head in her heart, which I kind of refer to as like the washing machine cycle. I married one of these people. They're not very good at quick decisions because they need all of the information and all of the ideas before they decide what to do. Now, Mother Teresa actually had a trouble even being sainted upon her death because I'm not Catholic, but step one is you have to be Catholic. Step two is you have to do good stuff, right? So upon her death, quite sure how she identified because she typically questioned her own beliefs because she didn't know what the answers were, right? So she's spinning, trying to decide out if her God's will was to have this much pain and suffering on the planet, or was her God's will for her to intervene? And because she couldn't answer that, she kind of oscillated back and forth, which was very frustrating for people who were working with her. But she did eventually realize she could at least build a school. And that's when she was able to kind of show up in her trifecta and her work became a little bit more effective, even though she was constantly questioning the motivation and the incentives of her work. Now, lastly is Gandhi. I like to refer to as the biggest hot mess. If you're ever feeling bad about yourself, I highly recommend you read his autobiography. Usually someone asks me who wrote his autobiography. Just going to let that one sit there because Latin matters even now. In Gandhi's autobiography that he wrote, he's the author. He very much shows that he was a head action person. And I also am a head action person, so I very much identify with Gandhi in ways that is terrifying. He was first generation college student. He kind of accidentally got into law school. Lone wolf, doesn't really play well with others. Basically thought his own hunger strike would overthrow an entire government, and then it kind of did, and took full credit for it. Kind of like if you're watching Hoarders. I watch Hoarders to feel much better about my housekeeping skills. If you need help, if you're feeling lost or like you're some kind of disaster, just read his book. You're going to feel great. Eventually, he realized a sense of compassion and that his work might impact people that he hasn't even met and he'll never meet. And that's when he was able to show up in his trifecta, and his work actually became far more impactful than just his own ego kind of driving the work. Now, I do need to warn you, Gandhi was assassinated, but he was assassinated by his own people, not an enemy. So if you are identifying in any way with Gandhi, please notice you might be frustrating to the people in your immediate circle. That's a lesson from Gandhi. Now, if we take all three of these folks, and they were all disastrously challenging to work with, but they eventually had to realize what they were missing so that they could become conscious of the kind of comfortable bias they were bringing to significant social justice work. I think we can all agree that they all did good work. Most of us get really uncomfortable when I start disclosing like what seem to be secrets about how annoying these three people were. But I'm going to invite you, instead of getting kind of defensive about it or protective or loyal to one of these people, why don't you just realize you're annoying too and you can still do good work? When I did the research on them, and I did a lot of archival research, read all their journals, their letters, etc., because I'm a nerd, I was looking for a reason to separate myself from the responsibility of doing social justice work because I didn't think I was good enough. These people are amazing. I'm a hot mess that locks my keys in my car. When I was doing the archival research, what I realized is that they were a mess too, and they just did the right thing anyway some of the time. By doing the best you can with what you got some of the time, maybe upon your natural death or assassination, you will be remembered only for the good things that you do. But I don't believe you can be as effective until you're able to be conscious of how you are using all three variables about and focused on whatever your beliefs and values are. That's when you can become really conscious and use your bias. Part of the reason that I can't usually say this at the beginning, but part of the reason I don't start with an unconscious bias webinar is that most of the people who are trying to buy this webinar from me want me to like Windex bad stuff away, like squeegee it away so that there is only positive bias left. That's not how this works, because your positive bias may be just as misplaced as some negative bias that's actually accurate. What you're doing is flexing the muscle in between so that you can become conscious of your choices and conscious of your actions and your responses. Now, when we talk about saving the world and changing the world, I like this comic in particular because I think it's cyclical, right? Is that there's always kind of an outlier that's like, hey, I got a great idea, and has to convince other people of this great idea. And then over time, there are more people on the great idea side. And then somebody else has a great idea. And it just happens over and over and over again. Anger and dismissing people, exclusion, these are not good recruitment tools. And if you can know what you believe and know what your values are, and they survive your own questioning process, you're just going to believe and value in those things even more. But now you're going to be able to explain it to other people. That is a really key piece, because that is a recruitment tool for whatever it is you believe or value. But most of us don't really know what we believe or value, or we certainly haven't questioned it. But if we do, our work will matter more. Now, this is another social media meme that came out. I don't think it was in the 1900s, but It was very popular. I was still working in higher education at the time. And so there were like millions of copies of this poster made and they were put all over campus. And it's really beautiful, right? Like all oppression is connected. That's amazing. And why am I likely to be assassinated by my own people? What did I see? A typo. I hated this thing. It was everywhere. It's beautiful. It's all over campus. Every time I saw it, I was like, why is that word misspelled? Isn't there a group of people? Didn't you run spell check? You spent some time picking a font. You forgot to run spell check. Also, spoiler alert, I have to type the word privilege quite a bit in my line of work. I misspell it every time. I also misspell the word Jessica. That happens. I miss up an S. So I end up being Juicica most of the time. A W is near an S, at least on a keyboard, but there's two of them. I find the S eventually. Yep. How many emails have I sent out signed by Juicica? Yep. Here is something I can become conscious of. Do I now type my name and actually check it? Most of the time. Most of the time, I try really hard. I'm pretty sure everyone on this call at some point has or will receive an email signed Juicica. Honestly, this is why I started going by Jess professionally, because for some reason, without the Itka, I never got a W. It increased the odds of me spelling my own name correctly. This is my neuroses. You have your own. You don't need mine. But I do want you to kind of notice where you are really hard on yourself. Where are you really hard on other people? I still see this poster occasionally when I'm walking around people's offices. And I have now gotten to a place where I don't have a visceral, sweaty response when I see it, because I don't think in the grand scheme of things, the spelling error lost the impact of the whole poster. Just on me. But that's me. And that's on me. And that is how to check really your bias pieces. Now, I know that we have gone through a lot of different things. And before I actually talk about the book club, what I want to do is kind of open this up and see if you have any thoughts or comments or how this is landing. Some of you have questions. Usually, head heart people, you're like, can you run through the model one more time? Right, I know. Just someone randomly making up a model and talking about it in 40 minutes, and you're supposed to like know how that works. That's how I sell books. I also want to encourage you to send text messages to 202-670-4262. I'm happy to answer them now or later. I don't have any text just yet, but anyone want to put any questions in the chat or unmute, and you're welcome to tell me thoughts, comments, questions, ideas, anything. How you doing? Don't have any texts. I don't see any other questions. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is there is a survey that you can do that will actually assess which variables you are coming up with when you answer that survey in this given moment. So you can go to jesspettit.com/survey. Emily, I will put it in the chat. jesspettit.com/survey. Any errant W's? Nope. Okay, great. So jesspettit.com/survey. It's a 13 question little survey that's also statistically reliable because I'm a nerd. But it involves like puppies and Dolly Parton and food trucks. So it's kind of a low stakes feeling survey. But you're welcome to take the survey and it'll identify you with which strong variable you're showing up with when you get to make a choice. Is it heady? Is it hearty? Is it action? Is it a combo? When you actually go through the book, and we'll talk about this in the book club, often we show up with two variables, not just with one, but some of us, it's all one. But I'll give you a second to take the survey. And then if you get your results, feel free to put them in the chat and see how we started turning out. Emily says, oh, good, something for the sneaker people. I know the survey is totally for the action-oriented people. Oh, great. It looks like the results are coming in. Great. Again, the survey is jesspettit.com/survey. So Emily, of course, you got head and action. That does not surprise me at all. And heart. Remember, heart is not feelings. Emily, you are dripping with emotional availability. That is not what heart means. Heart means just the big ideas and concepts. So, my dear engineering friend, my guess is that you're probably a little structured when you start. And then you meet some like helium mylar balloon like me and are like, where is she going? Is there a thread here? Does she have an outline? That would be the hearty part, right? Because I'm all like, bliss. Lexi got heart, Cassidy got head, Elena heart, Robin head, Jackie heart, action. Okay, good. There's like a good combination that's happening. Great. So as you take the survey, it will change your results each time that you take it because that's where you're kind of entering at the time. There's usually a variable that will show up pretty often. Interestingly, as I have gotten more and more into doing kind of organizational development consulting work, my heart part is starting to show up more because it's more around ideation and innovation and thinking of big outside of the box ideas. Those of you that know me well, I am not any more emotionally available. Do not hug me, okay? So the heart part is showing up because of the ideas, not because of my emotional availability. Emily, perhaps that's helpful. You can hug me because I actually like you. It's the unwanted hugs. Like, why is this? This is one of the keepers from COVID, right? Is when we go to a conference, why is it always hugging? Just maybe a high five or just say high five. I would feel connected with you. That would be great. No one listens to me. Even if you wear the button that says like, I don't want physical contact, which I kept from every conference I went to because I was like, this is amazing. Please do not physically contact me. People are like, the results. Some of you instantly hate the results. Some of you are on question 3 because you're taking way too long to take a survey about food trucks and puppies. I just want you to have a variable to be able to know in the moment. So I challenge you and your team, go back and take the survey when change is about to happen, when there's conflict, when something really stressful is going on, even if it's outside of work, so that you can kind of assess who and how are you showing up in the moment. It'll help you be more conscious of what your kind of gut reaction is going to be so that you can slow down, use that gas pedal a little bit to deaccelerate a little so that you can be conscious of what it is you're going to do to respond. Now, you already have joined the webinar series. Thank you very much. Hopefully you got my email yesterday encouraging you to spread the word. Other people can still come in. I'm recording everything, including me coughing evidently. And the idea is I am working on a new book. And so this may be the last time that I actually do the Good Enough Now book club. Some of you have tears in your eyes. I know. We'll have more book clubs. But if you're interested, before this webinar series is over, you can we'll do the book club all together. And if you have a team and you want me to come in and do your own professional development team, because some people think this will be great to do within their own crowd, this includes free books. You just have to sign up before the end of the webinar so that I can get it going because my calendar's getting busy. So if you're interested, go to goodenoughnow.book.com/club. And that's how you kind of register for the book club or whatever. Don't forget to give me your address so that I can mail you a free book. And the new book, hopefully, is coming. Crazy Horse Memorial is the initiative that I'm supporting for this particular webinar. Yesterday, I got a bunch of questions about what is Crazy Horse supposed to look like, and a lot of people haven't heard about it. So I recommend going to crazyhorsememorial.org/donate because you probably have an employer match. And my dogs said they're not doing an employer match. So it's up to you to do an employer match. So thank you very much. Please feel free to make your own donations to support Crazy Horse Memorial. It's really one of my favorite places that's being built without state or federal funding to build a bridge between Indigenous folks and non-Indigenous folks, which I really think is a beautiful thing, especially right now. We should be building bridges. Also, as part of the book, this is the model and how I'm using head, heart, action and combining it with more organizational or corporate words, basically, or initiatives around being prepared, which is really understanding your office or organizational culture. What's the workplace culture? If you have that at your foundation, then it might be easier for leadership teams to recognize problems that they don't likely actually experience, but they have the resources to do something about. And once they're able to kind of recognize those, similar to looking at your bias, once you're able to kind of recognize things that you might not even experience, then you can make informed choices or respond to those things inside your organization or outside your organization. If you're interested, you are welcome to use this QR code that I made all by myself, and it's my pretty brand colors. Thank you, Pat Dwyer, for the inspiration. But you can send an email to sign up to pre-order my new book. For the record, I am almost done. And as soon as this webinar is over, I'm going right back at it. I'll take the lady sweater off and put my pajamas back on, but I'm back. And my hope is that this book will be in everybody's hands by spring. And if people start pre-ordering it, I'm going to have to finish it. See how that works? So please feel free to send me an email at info@jesspettit. Don't forget the S's, no W's, and lots of T's. And put in the subject, what if it happens pre-order? And I will make sure to send you a free copy of the book when it is tangibly in my hands. So you're welcome to use the QR code to set up a time to talk if you'd like to, but mostly just send me an email with what if it happens pre-order in the subject. Tomorrow's webinar is going to be the wild card, the first of many wild cards, actually. So when I do this webinar series for most of the clients, I do the starting place yesterday, unconscious bias, and then I call it a wild card. And then the fourth one, which is the very last webinar we're going to do in this series, and kind of tie it all together. And the reason why I do a wild card is that I think there's a lot of specific identities that people want to work on or talk about themselves, learn about for other people. So those are the wild cards. But it also gives you a chance to use the skills that I'm asking you to identify in yesterday and today's webinar. And then we're going to apply it to individual skill sets or individual identities through the wild cards. So tomorrow we're going to talk about gender. We're going to be doing my triangle, which some of you have seen 4,000 times, and you still have questions. So come on back. So that's tomorrow, February 7th, same time, same everything, same. You're welcome to text message me again at 202-670-4262 and use this QR code. I know there's a lot of them. Use this QR code to follow me on the Instagram. That is not a venereal disease, in case you're wondering. Please feel free. Send me an email. Pre-order the book. Do whatever you need to do. Set up a Trojan Unicorns appointment because I want to know everything. If I can do anything to help in the meantime, please feel free to contact me. I cannot wait. And I will see you bright and early, at least for Pacific time. Might have coffee. I'll probably have a different lady sweater on. I realized this morning I got to come up with 12 lady shirts. Luckily, I have a lot of clothes. I just don't wear them at home. Anyway, no suitcase required. A tour of my grown-up clothes. I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you very much.